Alexander Chen couldn't see the faces of the people who whispered about him, but he could hear every word. The staff thought they were being quiet as they moved through the mansion, dusting the priceless art his father collected. "Poor little rich boy," they'd say. "All that money, but he can't see a thing." At 17, Alexander had learned to live in a world of sounds rather than sights. The tap of his cane against marble floors, the rustle of curtains when windows were left open, the distant voice of his father, Victor Chen, tech genius and billionaire, always on the phone in another room, too busy building empires to notice his son. This morning, Alexander sat at his piano, running his fingers over the smooth keys without pressing down. The piano was his only true friend in this massive, empty house. He'd taught himself to play by ear when he was 7, after his mother died. Back then, his father had still made time for him. They would sit together while Alexander played simple songs, Victor's hand resting proudly on his shoulder. Those days were long gone. "Alexander, are you in here?" The sharp voice of his stepmother Vivian cut through his thoughts. Her heels clicked against the floor, getting closer. "There you are. Why aren't you dressed properly? The tutors will be here in 20 minutes. Alexander turned toward her voice. "I'm taking a break. I've been studying since 6 this morning." The sound of Vivian's annoyed sigh was familiar. She had married his father 3 years ago, and from the beginning, she had treated Alexander like an inconvenient piece of furniture that came with the house, something she had to work around, but didn't particularly want. "Your father pays a fortune for these tutors," she said. "The least you could do is look presentable when they arrive." Alexander bit back the words he wanted to say. That his father wouldn't even notice if he stopped taking lessons altogether. That Victor Chen hadn't sat through a single one of his recitals in years. "I'll change," he said instead. "Good." Vivian paused, and Alexander sensed she had more to say. Her perfume, too strong like everything about her, drifted closer as she approached. "By the way, your father's annual charity gala is next weekend." Alexander's stomach tightened. The gala was Vivian's favorite event of the year. 500 of the wealthiest people in the city gathered in their ballroom to pretend they cared about whatever cause was trendy that season. "I've decided you should perform this year," Vivian said, her voice suddenly sweet in a way that made Alexander more nervous than her usual sharpness. "Perform? You mean, play the piano? At the gala?" Alexander shook his head. "I don't play for audiences. Nonsense. You play beautifully. I've heard you when you think no one's listening." Her hand touched his shoulder and he resisted the urge to pull away. "Besides, it would be wonderful for your father's image. Tech billionaire's blind son overcomes disability. The press will eat it up." There it was, the real reason. "I have terrible stage fright," Alexander said quietly. "You know that. You'll get over it." Vivian's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "I've already told your father you agreed." He was very pleased. The lie hit Alexander like a physical blow. His father hadn't asked about him in weeks. There was no way Victor Chen had expressed any opinion about his son performing at the gala, but arguing would do no good. Vivian had found her perfect charity case, and it was him. After she left, Alexander turned back to the piano. His fingers found the keys and pressed down, softly at first, then with growing intensity. The music flowed from some deep place inside him, a place of loneliness and longing. He played his own compositions when alone, music that no one else had ever heard. The thought of performing these private feelings for a room full of strangers made his chest tighten with panic. "That was beautiful," a quiet voice said from the doorway. Alexander's hands froze on the keys. "Who's there?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." The voice belonged to a woman he didn't recognize. Not staff. They knew better than to comment on his playing. "I'm Rose. I work for the catering company. We're here to plan the menu for the gala." Alexander nodded stiffly. "You shouldn't be in this part of the house. I got lost." "This place is like a maze." There was a smile in her voice. "But I'm glad I got lost. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heard you play." "Please don't tell anyone," Alexander said quickly. "About getting lost? About hearing me play like that. It's private." Footsteps approached, soft, hesitant. "Can I ask why?" "You're really talented." Alexander turned away. How could he explain that his music was the only thing that truly belonged to him? That playing for others felt like giving away pieces of himself that he'd never get back. "I need to change before my tutors arrive," he said instead. "Of course. Sorry again for intruding." The footsteps retreated, then stopped. But for what it's worth, whoever gets to hear you play at that gala is really lucky." After she left, Alexander sat motionless at the piano. Rose was wrong. The people at the gala wouldn't be coming to appreciate music. They'd be coming to stare at the blind boy, to feel better about themselves for watching the billionaire's broken son stumble through a performance. Because that's what would happen. Every time Alexander had been forced to play for an audience larger than his piano teacher, panic had frozen his fingers. Notes he could play perfectly alone became jumbled and wrong when others watched. His mind would go blank, sweat would drip down his back, and the whispers would start. His phone buzzed with a text message. Alexander pressed a button and the automated voice read it aloud. "Alexander, this is Dad. Vivian tells me you're playing at the gala. Proud of you, son. Looking forward to it." Alexander's throat tightened. 6 months. It had been 6 months since his father had spoken directly to him, and now this. A text message about a performance Alexander had never agreed to. But the words, "proud of you," echoed in his head. When was the last time he'd heard those words from his father? If playing at this gala could bring Victor Chen back into his life, even for one evening, with shaking hands, Alexander reached for his phone and dictated a reply. "Thanks, Dad, can't wait." The lie tasted bitter, but the hope behind it was real. Over the next week, Alexander practiced obsessively. He chose a piece that was technically impressive but not too personal, a Chopin nocturne that his piano teacher had selected years ago for a recital he'd been too afraid to perform in. 3 days before the gala, Alexander overheard Vivian talking to her friend Diane in the sitting room adjacent to his bedroom. "It's going to be priceless," Vivian said, her voice low but clear enough for Alexander's sensitive hearing to catch every word. "You should see him practicing. So serious, like he actually thinks people want to hear him play." "Isn't it a bit cruel?" Diane asked, though she didn't sound particularly concerned. "Please. The boy lives like a prince. A little public embarrassment won't kill him." Vivian laughed lightly. "Besides, people expect to see Victor's charity work at these events. What better example than his own damaged son? And Victor's okay with this? Victor doesn't care what happens at these events as long as the donations pour in. Trust me, he's not even going to be there for the performance. He's flying in late from Singapore." Alexander backed away from the door, his heart pounding. So that was it? His father's text had been another one of Vivian's manipulations. Victor wouldn't even be there to see him fail. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He slipped out of bed at 3 in the morning and made his way to the music room. In the darkness that looked no different to him than daylight, he sat at the piano and let his hands hover over the keys. For a moment, he thought about refusing to play, about embarrassing Vivian instead of himself. But then what? His father would be disappointed. The distance between them would grow even wider. No, he would play, but not Chopin. Alexander's fingers touched the keys and he began to compose a new piece. If he was going to be humiliated, it would be on his own terms with his own music. Something raw and real that would make those rich fake people uncomfortable. Something that said, "This is who I am, blind and broken and still here." As dawn broke outside windows he couldn't see, Alexander finished his composition. It was chaotic and beautiful and terrifying, just like the feelings inside him. He had 3 days to memorize it. Perfectly. 3 days until he would stand before his stepmother's friends and tear himself open for their entertainment. 3 days until the night. That would change everything. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of activity that Alexander could sense from his bedroom. The mansion hummed with the sounds of caterers setting up, security guards checking guests against lists, and staff polishing every surface until it gleamed. None of it was for him. He was just another prop in Vivian's perfect charity showcase. "Alexander, are you dressed?" His father's assistant, Grace, knocked on his door. At least she had the decency to sound genuinely concerned. Almost, he lied. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, still in his bathrobe, his formal clothes laid out beside him. The thought of putting them on made his stomach churn. "Your stepmother sent me to check on you. The guests are arriving and she wants you downstairs in 30 minutes. Grace hesitated. "Can I help with anything?" Alexander shook his head. "I'm fine. Thank you, Grace." After she left, he forced himself to get dressed. The suit felt too tight, like it was choking him. His hands trembled as he attempted to tie his bow tie. After 3 failed attempts, he left it hanging loose around his neck. A soft knock on his door surprised him. "Alexander?" It was Rose, the caterer he'd met last week. "Sorry to bother you. Your stepmother asked if I could make sure you're ready." Alexander almost laughed. So Vivian was now sending the catering staff to check on him. How fitting. "Come in," he said. The door opened and Rose stepped inside. "Oh," she said softly. "You're having trouble with your tie." "I usually have someone help me," Alexander admitted. "My regular assistant is off tonight. May I?" Rose asked, stepping closer. Her voice was kind, without a trace of pity. Alexander nodded. He felt her hands gently take the ends of his bow tie, her movements careful but confident. "My little brother has sensory issues," she explained as she worked. "He hates formal clothes, too. But he's learning to play the violin, and he loves it so much that he'll wear anything if it means he gets to perform." "I'm not like your brother," Alexander said. "I don't want to perform. I'm being forced to." Rose's hands paused. "Forced? By your father?" "By Vivian." "My father," Alexander swallowed hard. "He probably won't even be there. Then why do it?" The question hung in the air between them. Why indeed? Alexander had been asking himself the same thing for days. "Because maybe he will be there," Alexander finally said. "And maybe if I play well enough he'll see me. Really see me for the first time in years." Rose finished his tie and stepped back. "There, perfect." Her voice softened. "For what it's worth, I'll be there. In the kitchen mostly, but I'll sneak out to hear you play." Alexander nodded, touched by the gesture even though he knew it wouldn't help. One friendly face in a crowd of strangers wouldn't stop the panic when it came. Downstairs, the gala was in full swing. Alexander navigated the crowded ballroom with his cane, hyper-aware of conversations stopping as he passed. People moved aside, their whispers following him like a trail of breadcrumbs. "That's the Chen boy. Completely blind since birth. Such a shame. With all that money? I heard he's quite disturbed." Alexander kept his face expressionless. He'd had years of practice hiding his feelings from people who saw only his disability. "Alexander, there you are." Vivian's voice cut through the crowd, artificially bright. Her hand clamped around his arm, fingers digging in. "Come meet the Washingtons. They're very excited to hear you play." For the next hour, Alexander was paraded from group to group, a curiosity for Vivian's friends to marvel at. "He taught himself to play, isn't that remarkable?" she would say, as if he weren't standing right there. "We're so proud of his courage." The words made Alexander's skin crawl, but he smiled and nodded and shook hands, counting down the minutes until his performance. Finally, a microphone squealed as someone tapped it. "Ladies and gentlemen," an announcer called, "if you would all please make your way to the East Ballroom. The musical portion of our evening is about to begin." Alexander felt his heart rate double. This was it. Vivian appeared at his side. "Ready for your big moment?" she asked, her voice honeyed with fake enthusiasm. "Everyone is so looking forward to it." "Is my father here?" Alexander asked quietly, a slight pause. "He's been delayed, darling. But he'll be here soon. He wouldn't miss it." The lie stung, but Alexander had expected it. He nodded and let Vivian lead him toward the piano that waited at the front of the East Ballroom. The crowd fell silent as Alexander was positioned at the bench. Hundreds of people waited, their collective breath creating a soft hush that felt like pressure against his skin. Alexander placed his fingers on the keys. The familiar ivory should have been comforting, but now it felt alien. His mind went blank. The new composition he'd created, where had it gone? He couldn't remember a single note. Panic rose in his throat. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Just play something, anything, he told himself. But his fingers wouldn't move. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, he heard a voice just loud enough for him to catch. "You can do this, Rose." She'd kept her promise. Alexander took a deep breath and began to play. Not his composition. That was still lost in the fog of his anxiety. Instead, he played the Chopin nocturne he'd originally practiced, the safe choice. For the first minute, it went well. His muscle memory took over, guiding his fingers through the familiar patterns. The audience remained silent, perhaps surprised that the blind boy could actually play. But then his thoughts began to intrude. Was he playing too fast, too slow? Was the audience bored? Were they laughing at him? His right hand slipped, hitting a wrong note. The jarring sound broke his concentration, and suddenly the music fell apart. Notes tumbled over each other, the tempo erratic. Alexander tried to recover, to find his way back to the piece, but his mind was racing too fast. Someone laughed, a quick, stifled sound that was hastily hushed. But Alexander heard it, and it confirmed his worst fears. They were laughing at him, just as Vivian had planned. Somehow he kept playing, stumbling through the rest of the nocturne in a haze of humiliation. When he finally hit the last note, mercifully correct, there was a pause before polite applause scattered through the room. Wasn't that lovely? Vivian's voice boomed over the microphone. Let's give Alexander another round of applause for his bravery. The word bravery twisted like a knife. There was nothing brave about what had just happened. It had been a spectacle, exactly as Vivian intended. Alexander stood, gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles hurt. He needed to get out, away from the pitying applause and whispered comments. He made his way off the stage, counting steps until he reached the side door that he knew led to the garden. Behind him, Vivian was already introducing the next performer, a famous opera singer who would no doubt erase the memory of the billionaire's blind son and his disastrous performance. The cool night air hit Alexander's face as he stepped outside. The sounds of the gala faded as he walked deeper into the garden, using his cane to navigate the familiar path to the stone bench beside the fountain. Once there, he sat down, his entire body shaking. He had failed. Failed himself, failed to prove Vivian wrong, failed to give his father, if he had even shown up, any reason to be proud. Hey. Alexander jumped at the voice. Who's there? It's me, Lily. It wasn't Rose's voice. This one was younger, rougher, with an accent he couldn't place. I don't know any Lily, Alexander said, wiping quickly at his eyes. Please leave me alone. I work with Rose. Well, not exactly with her. I'm her student. She snuck me in to hear the fancy music. The girl moved closer, her footsteps light on the gravel. I was in the back when you played. Alexander turned away. Then you saw me make a fool of myself. Nah. The bench creaked as Lily sat down beside him. I saw a guy with stage fright get thrown to the wolves by people who should have been protecting him. The blunt assessment startled Alexander. No one had ever described his situation so accurately. You can play, Lily continued. That was obvious in the first minute. But then you got in your own head, started thinking about the audience instead of the music. You sound like you know a lot about it. I play too. Violin. On street corners mostly. There was no shame in her voice. You learn quick how to shut out distractions when you're trying to play over traffic noise. Alexander turned toward her, curious despite his embarrassment. You're a street musician? I'm whatever I need to be to survive. Lily's voice hardened slightly. Foster system spit me out last year when I turned 18. Been on my own since then. The straightforward admission silenced Alexander. Here he was, feeling sorry for himself in his family's mansion while this girl fought just to eat. Anyway, Lily said, her tone lightening, I didn't come out here to tell you my sad story. I came because I heard something in your playing, before you messed up. Something real. Real? Alexander repeated. Yeah, like you weren't just playing notes, you were saying something. Lily shifted on the bench. So I wondered what you'd sound like if you weren't scared. Alexander almost laughed. I guess we'll never know. Sure we will. Lily's voice came closer, urgent and intense. Because I'm going to teach you how to make them listen. You? Alexander couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. No offense, but you don't know what you're talking about. Those people in there, they didn't come to listen. They came to stare at the freak show. Exactly. Lily snapped her fingers. So stop trying to be what they expect. Play what you feel, not what you think they want to hear. It's not that simple. It is, though. The bench creaked again as Lily stood up. Look, I should go before security catches me out here. But I'll be back tomorrow. Rose says the staff entrance is unguarded between shifts. Why would you come back? Alexander asked, bewildered. Because, Lily said, as if it were obvious, you need help and I need a warm place to practice during the day. Seems like a fair trade to me. Before Alexander could respond, she was gone, her footsteps fading into the darkness. Alexander sat alone, his mind replaying her words. She was probably crazy. Some random street kid who'd snuck in for free food and gotten carried away with a fantasy about teaching the billionaire's son. But as ridiculous as it was, for the first time since the gala began, Alexander felt something like hope. Alexander didn't expect Lily to actually return the next day. Street kids made promises they couldn't keep. That's what Vivian would say. But at precisely 2 o'clock, when the day staff left and the evening shift hadn't yet arrived, the music room door creaked open. "Told you I'd be back," Lily said, her voice carrying across the room. "Nice digs you got here." Alexander turned toward her voice, his fingers pausing on the piano keys. "How did you get past security?" Rose helped. "She's covering for me." Footsteps approached, light, cautious steps that suggested Lily was taking in her surroundings. "Wow, is that a Steinway?" "Must have cost more than my entire life." Alexander nodded. "My mother picked it out before she died. She used to play." He ran his hand along the polished wood. "You said you play violin?" "Yep, got it right here." There was a rustling sound, then the snap of a case opening. "Nothing fancy like your setup. Teacher at the shelter gave it to me before I aged out." "You brought your violin?" Alexander couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Course I did. Can't teach you without showing you, can I?" The sound of rosin being applied to a bow filled the brief silence. "So what were you playing when I came in?" Didn't sound like that boring Chopin piece from last night. Alexander felt his face warm. "It's nothing. Just something I made up. That's what I'm talking about." Excitement colored Lily's voice. "Your own music. Play it again from the beginning. I don't think... Just play." Something in her tone, not harsh but allowing no argument, made Alexander place his fingers back on the keys. He began the piece he'd been composing since the disastrous gala, a turbulent melody that captured his humiliation and anger. He played for nearly 2 minutes, lost in the music before realizing that Lily hadn't made a sound. He stopped abruptly. "What, is it that bad?" "Bad, are you kidding?" Her voice had moved closer. "It's incredible. Raw and real." A pause. "But you're holding back. What do you mean?" "I mean, you're playing angry, but you're playing scared too. Like you're afraid someone's gonna walk in and hear what you really want to say." Alexander's hands clenched into fists. How could this girl he'd just met understand what he'd been struggling with his entire life? "Try again," Lily said. "But this time forget anyone else exists. It's just you and the piano. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to live with these people." "No, I just have to survive on streets where nobody gives a damn if I live or die." Lily's voice had an edge now. "You think you're the only one with problems, rich boy?" The blunt words hit Alexander like a slap. He turned away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive, fire, forget it." Lily sighed. "Look, I get it. Different problems, different lives. But music? That's the same for both of us. It's how we survive." Alexander nodded slowly. "So what's your suggestion?" "First, play me that piece again. But this time, don't hold anything back. If you're angry at your dad, play it. If you hate that step-monster of yours, play it. Whatever you're feeling, I want to hear it." Alexander took a deep breath and began again. This time he thought about Vivian's smug satisfaction as she paraded him around the gala. He thought about his father's constant absence, the text message that had given him false hope. He thought about the laughter from the audience when he hit the wrong note. The music poured out of him, no longer just angry but wounded, desperate, longing for something he'd never had. When he finished, his breath came in short gasps as if he'd been running. "Now that," Lily said softly, "is music." Alexander wiped his forehead with his sleeve. It felt different, because it was honest. The sound of a violin being tuned drifted through the room. "Now let me show you something." The first notes of Lily's violin startled Alexander. They were sharp, aggressive, almost violent. Nothing like the classical training he'd expected. Her bow attacked the strings, drawing out sounds he'd never heard from a violin before. It was street music, raw and defiant. Then, without warning, the melody softened, becoming achingly beautiful before building again to a furious crescendo. When she finished, the room seemed to vibrate with the echo of her playing. That was... Alexander struggled to find words. "That was me," Lily said simply. "The real me. Not the me people expect when they see a homeless girl with a violin." She moved closer and he sensed her sitting beside him on the piano bench. "Now play with me." "What?" "You heard me." "I'll start, you follow. Don't think, just play." Before Alexander could protest, Lily's violin sang out again, starting with a simple, haunting melody. Alexander hesitated, then placed his hands on the keys and began to accompany her, feeling his way through the unfamiliar territory. At first, they were awkward together, like dancers stepping on each other's toes. but gradually something clicked. Alexander found himself anticipating Lily's phrases, responding to her musical questions with answers of his own. Their instruments spoke to each other, two voices finding common ground despite their differences. When they finally stopped, Alexander was breathing hard, exhilarated in a way he'd never felt before. "That was," he began. "A start," Lily finished for him. "We've got work to do." A door slammed somewhere in the house, making them both jump. "Alexander?" Vivian's voice called from down the hallway. "Who are you talking to?" Lily was on her feet instantly. "Back entrance?" "Through the sunroom, left at the hallway, exit door by the kitchen," Alexander whispered urgently. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Same time," Lily promised, already moving. Her footsteps receded just as Vivian's approached. "Alexander?" Vivian appeared in the doorway. "I thought I heard voices." "Just me," Alexander said, turning back to the piano. "Talking to myself while I practice?" Vivian sniffed disapprovingly. "Well, keep it down. I have guests coming for tea and I won't have them disturbed by your experiments." Her heels clicked sharply as she left. Alexander smiled to himself. Little did Vivian know the experiments were just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Lily returned every day during the staff change. Sometimes she stayed for an hour, sometimes for 3, depending on whether Vivian was home. They played together, Lily pushing Alexander to express himself more boldly, while he helped refine her natural talent with his classical training. "You need to stop playing like you're afraid of breaking the piano," Lily told him on their 5th day. "Hit the keys like you mean it. And you need to stop sawing at your violin like you're trying to cut it in half," Alexander retorted. "There's power in control too, you know." They argued, they laughed, they played until their fingers ached. And somewhere along the way, they became friends. Alexander learned that Lily had been in foster care since she was 8, bounced between 6 different homes before aging out of the system. She'd discovered the violin at a community center program and shown such natural talent that one of the teachers had taken an interest in her, giving her private lessons whenever she could afford them. "Rose was one of my teachers," Lily explained. "That's how I ended up at your fancy party. She thought hearing professional musicians might inspire me." A laugh. "Instead, I found you." In turn, Alexander told Lily about his mother's death, his father's emotional withdrawal, and Vivian's arrival in their lives. "She's not evil," he admitted. "Just shallow. She married my father for his money and got stuck with his blind son as part of the package. Still doesn't give her the right to humiliate you in public," Lily argued. On their 10th day together, Alexander finally shared the piece he'd been working on in secret, the one he'd intended to play at the gala. "It's not finished," he warned as he began. Lily listened in silence until he reached the abrupt ending. "It's good," she said thoughtfully. "But it's all about pain. Where's the fire?" "Fire. Yeah, the part where you fight back. Every good story has that moment where the underdog says, 'Enough.'" Lily picked up her violin. "Let me show you." She played a variation of his melody, but where his ended in quiet resignation, hers transformed, building towards something defiant and powerful. "See?" she said. "Don't just tell them you're hurt. Tell them you're still here, still standing." Alexander nodded slowly, understanding washing over him. "Play it again. I want to try something." Together they began to reshape his composition, weaving their instruments together in a musical conversation. Alexander's classical precision blended with Lily's street-smart improvisation, creating something entirely new. They were so absorbed in their work that neither of them heard the door open. "What is going on here?" Vivian's cold voice cut through their music like a knife. Alexander's hands froze on the keys. "Who are you?" Vivian demanded. "How did you get in here?" "I invited her," Alexander said, rising to his feet before Lily could answer. For the first time in his life, he faced his stepmother without fear. "She's my music teacher." "Your what?" Vivian's voice rose an octave. "This girl is trespassing. I'm calling security." "If you do," Alexander said calmly, "I'll tell my father exactly why you wanted me to play at the gala. I'll tell him how you planned my humiliation from the beginning." A stunned silence followed his words. "You wouldn't dare," Vivian finally said, but uncertainty tinged her voice. "Try me." Alexander reached for his cane. "Lily is helping me prepare for my next performance. Either she stays or I call my father right now." The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Then surprisingly, Vivian laughed. Well, well, the blind boy has teeth after all. Her voice turned calculating. Fine, keep your little friend. But if anything goes missing, I'll know exactly who to blame. Her footsteps retreated, the door closing firmly behind her. Holy crap, Lily breathed. You just stood up to the dragon lady. Alexander was trembling, but not from fear. For the first time since his mother died, he had taken control of something in his life, and it felt good. We should probably get back to work, he said, a smile spreading across his face. We've got a performance to prepare for. We, Lily repeated. What performance? You'll see, Alexander said, sitting back at the piano. Now, about that fire you mentioned. The next afternoon, Alexander paced the music room, waiting for Lily. His confrontation with Vivian had changed something between them. His stepmother had started watching him more carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. When Lily finally arrived, she was breathless. Sorry I'm late. Had to dodge your stepmother. She was in the kitchen talking to Rose. What were they saying? Alexander asked, suddenly worried. Vivian was asking about me, where I came from, how I knew you. Lily moved closer, her voice dropping. Rose covered for us. Said I was the daughter of one of her music school colleagues. Alexander let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. Vivian's suspicious enough already. Speaking of which, Lily said, setting down her violin case, what did you mean yesterday about a performance? Please tell me you're not planning another disaster like that gala. Alexander smiled, feeling a strange new confidence. Not exactly. There's a charity benefit concert next month at the Hamilton Concert Hall. My father's company is a major sponsor. And I've decided we're going to perform there together. Silence filled the room. Alexander could practically hear Lily thinking. Are you crazy? She finally asked. That's a real concert hall with real musicians. Professional musicians. I know. Alexander moved to the piano, sitting down and running his fingers lightly over the keys. But what we're creating together, it's different, special. It's not ready for public performance, Lily argued. And even if it was, they'd never let someone like me on stage. Someone like you? Alexander repeated, turning toward her voice. Don't play dumb. You know what I mean? Lily's footsteps paced across the room. I'm a homeless kid with a second-hand violin. Those people wouldn't let me clean their concert hall, let alone play in it. Those people, Alexander said quietly, include my father, and if he's sponsoring the event, he gets to choose at least one performer. He paused, or in this case, two. You haven't even talked to your father in months. How are you going to convince him? Alexander took a deep breath. I'm not. You are. What? The pacing stopped abruptly. Not directly, Alexander clarified. We're going to make a recording. Something so good, so different that he can't ignore it. Vivian will be furious, but my father, he respects talent. Always has. This is insane, Lily muttered. Completely insane. Maybe. Alexander shrugged. But isn't it better than playing for tips in subway stations? The silence that followed told him his words had hit home. Fine, Lily finally said. But if we're really doing this, we do it right. No half measures. Agreed. Alexander smiled. Let's get to work. For the next week, they refined their composition, a bold fusion of classical and street styles that told the story of two outsiders finding their voices together. They recorded take after take on the high-end equipment in Alexander's home studio, pushing each other to new heights of performance. More feeling on that transition, Lily would demand. Watch your tempo in the third movement, Alexander would counter. They argued. They laughed. They played until their fingers bled. And slowly, something magnificent took shape. On the day they finished the final recording, Alexander received a text message that made his phone chirp with his father's custom alert, a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Alexander, the automated voice read, coming home tomorrow for 2 days. Would like to have dinner. We'll be bringing potential business partners. Vivian says you've been taking music lessons. Perhaps you could provide some background music. Dad? Alexander's heart raced as he relayed the message to Lily. This is it, he said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. Our chance to play for him directly. Background music? Lily sounded unimpressed. He wants us to be elevator music for his business dinner? No, Alexander said firmly. He thinks that's what he wants. but we're going to give him something he'll never forget. The next evening, Alexander sat at the piano in the formal dining room, dressed in his best suit. Lily stood beside him wearing a dress borrowed from Rose. They had argued about her presence. Vivian had expected Alexander alone, but he had insisted. Either both of us play, or neither of us does, he'd told his stepmother, who had reluctantly agreed rather than upset Victor's plans. The dinner was underway, the conversation a dull murmur of business talk that Alexander had heard all his life. His father sat at the head of the table, his voice confident as he discussed merger possibilities with the Japanese executives he'd brought home. "Perhaps some music now, Alexander," Victor called during a lull in the conversation. Alexander nodded, feeling Lily tense beside him. They had practiced for hours, but never with an audience, certainly not one that included his father and important business associates. "Don't think about them," Lily whispered so softly only he could hear. "It's just you and me, like always." Alexander took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes were soft, traditional, exactly the kind of pleasant background music his father had expected. He could sense the dinner guests returning to their conversations, the music fading into the background of their awareness. Then Lily's violin entered, not with the gentle harmony they might have anticipated, but with a fierce, challenging theme that cut through the dinner chatter like a knife. The conversation stuttered to a halt. Alexander could feel the sudden attention of everyone in the room. They played on, their instruments speaking to each other in a musical language that defied categorization. Sometimes classical, sometimes edgy and modern, always authentic. The piece told their story: isolation, frustration, discovery, connection, and finally, triumph. When they reached the final movement, the part they called the fire, Alexander poured everything he had into his playing. His fingers flew across the keys, no longer hesitant or afraid. Beside him, Lily's violin sang with raw power and precision. The last note lingered in the air, and then silence. For one terrible moment, Alexander thought they had failed. Had the performance been too bold, too unlike the pleasant background music his father had requested? Then a chair scraped back. Footsteps approached, his father's distinctive gait. "Alexander." Victor's voice was closer than it had been in years. That was extraordinary. Alexander turned toward his father's voice, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Who wrote that piece?" Victor asked. "We did," Alexander said, gesturing toward Lily. "Both of us together." "And you are?" Victor's attention shifted. "Lily Chen, sir." Her voice was steady, though Alexander could hear the tension in it. "I've been working with Alexander for a few weeks now." "Weeks?" Victor sounded genuinely surprised. "And you've created something this complex in just weeks?" "Yes, sir," Lily replied. There was a pause, and Alexander wished desperately that he could see his father's face. Was he angry about the disrupted dinner? Embarrassed by their unconventional performance? "The benefit concert at Hamilton Hall next month," Victor said suddenly. "Our company has a performance slot. I want you, both of you, to play this piece there." Alexander felt a surge of triumph so intense it was almost painful. "We'd be honored," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "But Victor," Vivian interjected from across the room, "that's a very prestigious event. The guests expect professional musicians, not..." "Not what, Vivian?" Victor's voice had a dangerous edge. "Not my son and his clearly talented partner? I think our guests will find this a refreshing change from the usual string quartets, don't you?" The silence that followed told Alexander that his stepmother had been effectively silenced. "Now," Victor continued, his hand coming to rest briefly on Alexander's shoulder, "if you two wouldn't mind playing something else while we finish our meal. Perhaps something a bit more traditional this time." Alexander nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His father's hand had touched his shoulder, the first physical contact between them in longer than Alexander could remember, as they began to play again, a more conventional piece that still carried echoes of their unique style. Alexander felt a shift in the very foundation of his world. For the first time in years, his father had truly seen him, not as the blind son who needed to be managed, but as an artist with something valuable to offer. The next morning, Alexander was summoned to his father's study, another first in recent memory. "Sit down, Alexander," Victor said as Alexander entered, tapping his cane to navigate the unfamiliar space. "We need to talk about your friend Lily." Alexander's stomach clenched. Had Vivian revealed Lily's background after all? She's remarkably talented, Victor continued. But Rose tells me her situation is complicated. Alexander swallowed hard. She's homeless, Dad. She aged out of the foster system last year. A silence followed, broken only by the sound of Victor drumming his fingers on his desk, a habit Alexander remembered from childhood, a sign his father was thinking deeply. I see, Victor finally said. And yet instead of using her talent to secure a more stable position, she's been spending her time helping my son rediscover his passion for music. She's been teaching me more than music, Alexander said quietly. Yes, Victor agreed. I can see that. Another pause. The guest house on the east side of the property has been empty since your grandmother moved to Florida. It has its own entrance, privacy, a small kitchen. Alexander sat perfectly still, afraid to break the moment with the wrong word. I think, Victor continued, that if Lily is going to continue as your musical partner, she should have a proper place to live and practice. Don't you? Alexander couldn't speak. He nodded, then found his voice. Thank you, Dad. Don't thank me yet, Victor said, his chair creaking as he leaned back. There's a condition. What condition? The Hamilton benefit concert is just the beginning. If your performance is as good as I believe it will be, I want to arrange a proper tour. 5 cities, major venues. His voice softened slightly. It's time the world saw what my son can do. Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll work hard. Say you'll make me proud. Victor paused. Say you'll forgive me for not seeing what was right in front of me all these years. In that moment, Alexander understood that his father wasn't just offering Lily a place to stay or them a chance to perform. He was offering Alexander what he'd wanted all along, a chance to be seen, truly seen by the person who mattered most. I will, Dad, he promised. We both will. As Alexander left the study, tapping his way back to the music room where Lily was waiting, he felt lighter than he had in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, he knew that. There would be challenges, doubts, moments of fear. But for the first time, he wouldn't be facing them alone. He had Lily, he had music, and now, incredibly, he had his father back. The real performance was about to begin. The night of the Hamilton benefit concert arrived faster than either Alexander or Lily had expected. For the past month, they had practiced relentlessly, refining their composition until every note felt inevitable. Lily had moved into the guest house, still amazed at the turn her life had taken. I keep expecting someone to tell me it's all a joke, she admitted to Alexander the morning of the concert as they ran through their piece one final time, that I'll have to pack up and go back to the streets. Not going to happen, Alexander assured her, his fingers confident on the keys. My father signed the paperwork yesterday. The guest house is legally yours for the next 5 years, no matter what happens tonight. Lily missed a note on her violin. He did what? You didn't tell me that. Alexander smiled. I wanted it to be a surprise. Dad said it's payment for music therapy services rendered. His smile widened. He also set up a scholarship for you at the Berklee School of Music starting next fall. The violin clattered as Lily set it down abruptly. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. Breathe, Lily, Alexander said gently. You deserve this. No one's ever. She stopped, her voice thick. Your dad barely knows me. He knows enough, Alexander replied. He knows you helped his son when no one else would. That matters to him. Silence filled the room for a moment before Lily picked up her violin again. Then we'd better not disappoint him tonight, she said, her voice steadier. From the top, they practiced until noon, when Victor's assistant arrived to drive them to the concert hall for sound check. The reality of what they were about to do finally hit Alexander as they walked onto the stage of the prestigious Hamilton Concert Hall. There are 2,000 seats out there, he whispered to Lily, his old anxiety threatening to return. And every single one will be filled with someone who's about to have their mind blown. Lily replied with the confidence that had carried her through years on the streets. We've got this, Alex. The sound check went smoothly, though Alexander could sense the technician's initial skepticism. Who were these kids, and why had the great Victor Chen insisted they be given a prime spot in the program? But as they played, the whispers in the background fell silent, replaced by a respectful attention that told Alexander they had won at least this first audience. Back at the mansion, Alexander changed into the new suit his father had ordered for the occasion. As he adjusted his tie, he could do it himself now. A small independence he was proud of. There was a knock at his door. "Come in," he called. "It's me." His father's voice, still an unexpected presence after so many years of absence. "I wanted to see if you needed anything before we leave." Alexander turned toward the door, fighting the impulse to smooth his hair or check his clothes. "I'm good, I think. Nervous, but good." "Nervous is normal," Victor said, coming further into the room. "I still get nervous before big presentations." "You do?" Alexander couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Of course." Victor's footsteps approached, and Alexander felt his father's hands on his shoulders, straightening his jacket slightly. "The trick is to use the nervousness, not let it use you." Alexander nodded, struck by how similar his father's advice was to Lily's. "Dad, thank you for everything you're doing for Lily." Victor's hand stilled on his shoulders. "Your mother would have liked her, I think. She had that same fire." The mention of his mother, something his father almost never did, left Alexander speechless. "We should go," Victor said, clearing his throat. "Vivian and Lily are waiting downstairs." The drive to the concert hall passed in a blur. Alexander sat beside Lily in the back of his father's car, Vivian and Victor in the front. His stepmother had been coldly polite ever since Victor's unexpected support of Alexander and Lily's partnership. She hadn't openly objected to Lily moving into the guest house or to their performance tonight, but her disapproval was palpable. "Remember," she said as they approached the venue, "these are very important people. The creme de la creme of society. They expect a certain standard of performance. They'll get one," Victor said before either Alexander or Lily could respond. "Just not the standard they're expecting." There was something like pride in his father's voice, and Alexander felt a burst of confidence. He reached for Lily's hand, finding it already reaching for his. Backstage at the Hamilton was controlled chaos. Professional musicians in formal attire moved purposefully through the narrow hallways. Alexander could hear orchestral instruments being tuned, vocalists doing warm-up exercises, stage managers calling 5-minute warnings. "We're on after intermission," Lily whispered, guiding him to their designated waiting area. "Third act in the second half." Alexander nodded, focusing on his breathing the way Lily had taught him. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "Stay present. Stay grounded." "Alexander Chen?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar and official sounding. "Yes," he replied, turning toward the sound. "I'm Patricia Westfield, the event coordinator. There's been a slight change to the program." Her voice had the careful neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. "You'll be going on first after intermission, not third." Alexander felt a spike of anxiety. "Why the change?" "One of our featured performers, Mr. Hirano, specifically requested to hear your piece. He has another engagement and needs to leave early, so we're accommodating his schedule." Alexander froze. "Kenta Hirano?" "The pianist?" "Yes," Patricia confirmed. "Is that a problem?" Kenta Hirano was only the most celebrated classical pianist in the world, known for his technical brilliance and uncompromising standards. And he wanted to hear them play? "No," Alexander managed. "No problem." When the woman's footsteps receded, Lily gripped his arm. "Did I hear that right? Kenta Hirano wants to hear us?" "Apparently." Alexander's mouth had gone dry. "Oh God," Lily muttered. No pressure or anything. The first half of the concert passed in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. Alexander and Lily sat in the wings, listening to the polite applause that followed each traditional performance. String quartets, operatic soloists, a jazz ensemble that provided the evening's only deviation from classical repertoire. When intermission ended, a stagehand appeared to guide them to their positions. 2 minutes, he said. Alexander felt the smooth wood of the concert grand piano, so different from his Steinway at home. Beside him, Lily adjusted her violin, her movements quick and nervous. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the hall, "we are pleased to present a special performance by Alexander Chen and Lily Foster, performing an original composition entitled Invisible." The audience's applause was polite but reserved. Alexander could practically feel their skepticism. The blind son of Victor Chen and an unknown violinist? What could they possibly offer that would be worth this prestigious slot? "Just us," Lily whispered. "Just like always." Alexander nodded and placed his hands on the keys. The familiar action centered him, pushing away everything but the music waiting to be born. He began with a single note, held long and clear. Lily joined with her violin, a perfect harmonic counterpoint. Together they built the first movement, Darkness, a reflection of isolation and loneliness that Alexander had lived with for years. The audience was silent, but Alexander could feel their attention sharpening. This was not the pleasant background music they had expected. The second movement, Meeting, introduced the clash of their different worlds. Alexander's classical training battled with Lily's street-smart improvisation, each challenging the other in a musical argument that gradually found common ground. By the third movement, Partnership, Alexander knew they had the audience. The absolute silence between phrases told him they were hanging on every note, waiting to see where this unexpected journey would take them, and then it was time for the final movement, Fire. Alexander took a deep breath and launched into the most demanding section of the piece. His fingers flew across the keys, no longer careful or hesitant. Beside him, Lily's violin sang with raw power and precision, pushing him to match her intensity. The music built to a crescendo that Alexander knew was unlike anything these traditional concert-goers had heard before. Classical structure with the soul of street music, technical brilliance infused with raw emotion. It was their story, told in a language they had created together. The final notes hung in the air, resonating through the perfect acoustics of the hall. Then silence. For one terrible moment, Alexander thought they had misjudged everything. Had they gone too far? Been too different? Too raw for this sophisticated audience? Then the applause began. Not the polite, measured applause of earlier performances, but a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very stage beneath them. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in, the calls multiplying as the applause grew louder. Lily grabbed Alexander's hand, pulling him up from the piano bench to take a bow. "They're standing," she whispered fiercely in his ear. "Every single person is on their feet." Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes. They had done it. They had made these people, the same kind of people who had laughed at him at the gala, truly listen. As the applause continued, Alexander heard footsteps approaching from the side of the stage. A hand gripped his shoulder firmly. "Son." His father's voice thick with emotion. That was... For once, the eloquent Victor Chen seemed at a loss for words. "I'm proud of you," he finally said. "So proud." More footsteps approached. Lighter, quicker. Mr. Chen, Miss Foster. A Japanese-accented voice that Alexander recognized instantly. "I'm Kenta Hirano. Your performance was most unexpected." Alexander held his breath, waiting for the judgment that would surely follow. "I am preparing a world tour next season," Hirano continued. "I would be honored if you would consider appearing as special guests for several performances." Beside him, Lily made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We would be honored," Alexander managed to say, his voice steadier than he felt. As they were led off stage, the applause still thundering behind them, Alexander felt Lily's arm slip through his. "Not bad for a billionaire's blind son and a homeless girl, huh?" she whispered. Alexander smiled, thinking of how far they had both come. "We're not those people anymore," he said. "We're just musicians now. The best kind," Lily agreed. "The kind who make people listen." In the green room, surrounded by congratulations from other performers, Alexander felt his father's presence beside him, solid and real in a way it hadn't been for years. On his other side was Lily, whose courage had shown him how to find his own voice. For the first time in his life, Alexander Chen felt truly seen, not for what he couldn't do, but for what he could. Not as the blind son of a billionaire, but as an artist with something valuable to share, and that, he realized, was worth more than all his father's wealth. The music they had created together had built a bridge between worlds, between sight and blindness, wealth and poverty, isolation and connection. It had transformed them both, and this, Alexander knew, was just the beginning.